in your timeline in Resolve and like figure out what exactly needs to be done. How do we organize things? And then how do we get the project ready to set up a node structure, to set up any groups or other tools that we'll want to use. And then we'll go to setting a look, which is overall figuring out what your project is going to look like. We'll look at some tools in Resolve to do that. And then shot level adjustments, which covers a lot. So that's any shot matching, any corrections or balancing type of thing. We'll look at a lot of different tools that will do that. And for those who have just joined, welcome. Feel free to put your questions in the chat or do a quick intro of what you're most excited about learning or what your experience level is in Resolve thus far. All right, we've got a good group here. It's filling up. Very nice. How many of you, just out of curiosity, how many of you are very new to Resolve? And I want to make sure that some of you are unmuted. Make sure you are aware you are unmuted. So you can say something if you want, but I want to make sure it's intentional. All right, Abby is new. Cool. So we'll do a little bit more of an intro to the tools too. For those of you who are a little more experienced with it, I think you'll still get something out of the beginning section. But I want to make sure that everyone is familiar with the tools in general. All right, we've got a lot of new people. Great. Oh, hello, Dorothy. New to Davinci, usually use Adobe Premiere. Cool. It's great to learn new things. Something for those of you who have used Premiere before, um, there I'm currently on the edit page of DaVinci Resolve, the editor here. I'm just going to go to workspace and reset UI layout. So if you ever are using Resolve and you need things to kind of go back to a default, that is a good place to go, is just up in the workspace menu, reset UI layout. Like other editors, we've got a timeline, we've got our source viewer here, and we've got our timeline viewer here, and media and a bunch of other tools and stuff like that. So that's fairly familiar as far as editors go. If you're coming from Premiere or Final Cut or Avid even, there is a big difference when we start getting into color things because there's a whole separate page and interface for that. It's not like a plugin or a window in the inspector. It's a whole separate thing. So we'll dive into that in just a sec. Chris is wondering, will we get a recording copy of this class? I think so. Um, it is being recorded. We were able to do that last time, so I don't want to promise that yet because I don't know 100% for sure, but I think so. All right. And here we go. All right. Before I guess we get into the process of it, or looking at the color page, I want to talk about what is the process of color grading or the image journey that your video will go through. We'll come back to this, so you may not totally get this at first. That's okay. But I want to show this to you so we can kind of put it in the back of our minds as we're working. So sounds like someone's unmuted and they probably don't want to be. Marlon says, self-taught DaVinci user looking to enhance my color grading skills. Great. Cool. All right. So here, the color pipeline. This is the journey that your image or your whole project will go through from left to right, where things start over here and they will go through this way. The basics of this are, first we have color management. I'll go into this first, but the idea, both of these and these bookends of the process are color management. So that's taking our signal from something that is what the camera recorded, and then over here that is outputting that into what our display can show. So if you're familiar with log formats, the things, that's tends to be when a camera records and it looks washed out, that's really just your camera recording in a much wider range of ability and colors, and it doesn't display on your display properly. It doesn't know that it's supposed to display it somehow else. But what that allows is a lot more dynamic range of color and luminance values. We part of the first step of our process is color management of saying, here's how let's our input and here's our output. I'll go that into more detail. And I'm going to work backwards on this. So then the next part of the process is adding a show look or a look. In the film days, this was the film print, the stock of film that it was printed on before it went to the theaters. But this is an overall look for your project. And this will be the in most projects you'll do is an early part of the process you do, but you see that it's actually at the end of our color pipeline here. So sometimes the order that we color grade and do things is not the order that things happen. Um, then we've got scene looks. So one scene is totally at night. We want it to look a certain way. Another scene is indoors and we want that to look a different way. We're applying looks to scenes in our projects. And then over here, we have our shot level adjustments. So things that we do to each shot um, to, oh, this shot is too green, this shot is too blue, it's not dark enough, there's not enough contrast, it's not sharp enough, things like that. Those are all shot level adjustments where we're working on a particular shot to make it look better or different. And we'll differentiate between primary adjustments and secondary adjustments. We'll go into that in more detail, but the gist of it is that a primary adjustment is something that applies to the whole image. So something that, you move the whole thing to be a little more orange, or you move the whole thing to be a little bit brighter. And secondary adjustments is where uh, we're isolating a few parts of the image. So I just want the top left corner to be darker because there's a bright spot there, or I just want to isolate anything that's red in the thing and make that a little less saturated, stuff like that. So again, this we'll refer to these principles as we go. Don't feel a need to memorize it, but you can screenshot this if that helps. Um, but this is more an idea to come back to as we go. So that that is an intro to this. Don't worry if you're not getting it just yet. I will explain as we go, and it will become clearer as we go as well. So I want to give you a little bit of a sense of an intro to what some of these tools do and the color interface, and then we'll work on a project and grade it sort of start to finish really fast. So here I've got this grayscale ramp so I can show off the tools. If you ever want to test out what tools do on the color page, this is actually a great thing to start out with. Just like, what does this do if I adjust something? And I want to actually tell you how to get to this if you want. So in the upper left here, there's an effects panel, there's generators, and then there's a grayscale ramp. And you can just grab that and put it in your timeline and use that as an effect. You can you know, adjust things just like any other clip. And the other thing to say, if you want any of these generators to show up to be editable in the color page, you need to right click on it and click new compound clip. That just turns it into that puts it inside of like it nests it in another clip. And that's just how Resolve wants to work with things that are generated. If I have a piece of footage or, a still or anything like that, that's not necessary. This is just for the generators that Resolve has here. And I can totally answer questions about that later as we go. And we've got a message here. So there will be a recorded version of this will be on the channel next week. Cool. So feel free to review later. Take notes if you want, but sounds like there will be a way to review, which is great. All right, I'm going to switch to the color page. So I'm on the edit page now. You can see at the bottom of my screen, I've got the different pages in Resolve. And I can switch to the color page by clicking on color at the bottom here. There is also a keyboard shortcut that is Shift 6, the number 6. So you can switch to the color page by having your playhead over the clip you want to be on, click on this color page, or Shift-6 on your keyboard. And now I'm in the color page. So let's take a look at the interface here. There's a lot. If you're new to this program, or if you've done a little bit of editing of color in Final Cut or Premiere or anything else, this looks way different because this is not an editing interface with a timeline, or well, not a normal editing interface anyway. So we've got a lot going on here. First thing to know, just tips in Resolve. In the upper left here and in the upper right, there are these buttons to open and close parts of the interface. So if you ever need to make room or want to see what else you have access to, these are the places to click. And we'll open and close some of these as we go because we don't need them open all the time. First thing that at least you'll recognize is this is the viewer here, center top of the screen. So that is what we were seeing on the edit page. So at least we know, okay, we're looking at the right clip. We have a clips panel over here. So this shows all of the clips in our timeline. Now the color page is more clip-based than timeline-based. You're not necessarily playing through and seeing how long each clip is. You can do that, but generally you're coloring on the whole timeline or a clip at a time. So it's better to just see your clips here. Over here, we actually do have the timeline, so we can see how long each clip is, and we can scrub through just like we can on the edit page. I almost never have this open unless I need to play through the project or I want to see how long a clip is. But we can close that by coming up to the timeline panel right here. And there's also, if we wanted to close this clips panel, we could close that in this upper left area right here. I'm going to keep that on for now. Up here we have a gallery area, which we'll talk about later, but that is in order I can grab stills of this to reference later, or I can import stills for referencing. I have in the upper left here, I've got a LUT gallery, so I can grab a lot of LUTs, lookup tables. We can talk about that a little later of what they are and how to use them. But I don't know if that we will spend too much time on it. And there is a media pool up here, so you could see what you have in your media pool in your project as far as clips and stuff like that. Once you have a finished or a locked edit, you tend not to be dealing with media up here, but that is available. You can use that for bringing in mats if you're working with custom mats, masking, roto, stuff like that. I can answer questions about that, but I don't think we have time to cover that in detail. But you have a media pool here, and there we go. So I've got my viewer here that shows my output. This big area over here is my node area. So nodes are the way that Resolve works in a number of ways. So on the color page, we've got this here. You can think of it like layers in After Effects or Photoshop or any other image, like layer-based image editor. Nodes, there are similarities, except that you're not working from top to bottom. You're working from left to right. So each node is sort of like a layer, but it also allows us to have a more flowchart, a little more visually accessible way of seeing what happened. Think of it like an assembly line where, we can have everything that happens in this node, and then everything happened in this node, and then this node, and we can edit them in a bunch of different ways. And I'll get through how we're going to work with nodes shortly. But let's keep looking at the interface just so you know what's what. All right, at the bottom, we have a bunch of tools, this whole bottom palette. If you've ever opened up Resolve and you didn't see 3 panels here, that's probably because you have a smaller screen than I do. It may look something like this, where there's 2 panels at the bottom. That totally depends on your resolution of your screen. So the bigger your screen is, the more room Resolve's interface will have. And if you see this and want to expand it, You might be able to if you have a large enough resolution, and that requires you to be in this keyframes panel with the diamonds. And then there's a little button right here that expands that out. So this is the default, and if you don't see that, you can either go to Workspace and reset UI layout, or you might have to press that thing. Or you have a small resolution. I couldn't say for sure. I don't know which computer you're on. But that's something to know if when you open things up, you see something different. And these tool palettes at the bottom represent a lot of the tools and the adjustments we can make. We have a bunch of selecting icons right here and right here, which affect which panels are open. So I can just click on a button and switch between the different tools are available in this panel. And then I can click on these buttons and switch between a whole bunch of different tools that are available in this panel. And same thing over here. More tools, more tools, more tools. It's a lot. All right. And finally, part of the interface, up here in the upper right, there's an effects panel. So it's just a bunch of effects that you can apply to things here. So, if I was on this clip and I wanted to add a blur, I can do that. And I have controls up here where I can just whoop, blur like this like crazy. Don't want to do that, so I'm going to reset and go back here. All right. Let's go into what some of these tools actually do before we get started integrating a project. Feel free to put questions on the interface and stuff like that, anything I've covered thus far into the chat, and I will get to those as well. So first thing I want to cover is the primaries tools. So that's this circle tool here. These are some of the main and most basic tools to any color grade color correcting operations that we'll be doing. So I want to make sure that you have an understanding of these, and then we'll go into more. But again, if you do have questions about the interface or anything resolve related of getting into this page, I can go over that again. Just put a question in the chat. So primary color, here it's primaries color wheels. This palette has a bunch of tools. These tools are similar to things you might see in, at least some of them are similar to some things you might see in a Photoshop or other image editing. Even like preview on a Mac, you can click tools, edit color, and like adjust contrast and temperature and tint and stuff like that. So you may have an idea of what some of these do, but I want to show you on here. So if we look at the output of what's happening on the screen here, I have an image that's going from black all the way to white. And if let's go to my temperature tool first. This, again, you've seen this in Photoshop or other things. Temperature, I can make something warmer or cooler. So a little bit more towards orange or a little bit more towards blue. Tint, same thing. And this is similar to what we might see in a camera as well, a little more magenta or a little more green. Contrast, so this is, I'm going to make the bright parts brighter and the dark parts darker. So we're going to have a little more, less of a smooth gradient and more contrast. Let me actually show you a scope here so you can see what's happening here. So this scope just shows that line going from black to white. And so we can see here as I adjust contrast that the dark parts, things darker than this middle area get pulled down, and the things brighter than that middle area get pulled up. Or I can reduce contrast and it goes the other way, eventually getting to just a gray image. Now I can double click any of these tools to reset it to what it originally was. Now the pivot tool is affects the contrast. So the pivot changes what that midpoint is. So it's at 0.435 by default. Move that up or down to change what the midpoint of that contrast is. Mid-tone detail, can't really see on this image, so we can cover it later, but that basically softens the image. It's creating, it looks a little bit like a blur or a sharpen effect, but it's just affecting the amount of contrast in the midtones. So we can take a look at that later. Now our color wheels. We've got a lot going on here. These are some of the most fundamental tools for color grading and our matching tools. Is offset is both a wheel here, a color wheel here, and a luminance wheel. They call it Resolve calls it the master wheel. And if I go drag that left or right, you can see that the whole image is being affected. So it's the whole thing is getting darker or the whole thing is getting brighter. And I've got a little reset icon right here. And then same thing with color. If I drag the whole thing down, I can give the whole image a green tint, give it all a blue tint, give it all a red tint, and just drag that around until I make the color I want. And that affects the whole image in the same way. Now, lift, gamma, and gain, these wheels over here, affect only a piece of the image. So gain, for example, it's like taking the brightest part of the image and dragging that around, and everything that the effect falls off. So it's not affecting the darkest parts at all, and it's mostly going to affect the bright parts. So if I drag this up, you can see on the scope here that this upper corner is being dragged up and down, and the zero, the black point, is staying put. So if I mostly want to affect the highlights, bright parts of an image, I can use this. And same thing if I adjust the colors, that's mostly affecting the bright parts. Lift does the opposite. So if I grab this here, you can see that just the black point is what's being affected most strongly. And the brightest part, the white point, is not being affected at all. Same thing with the colors. I can just mostly in the shadow area, bring a color into that area. Now, gamma is sort of it's not exact, but it's sort of the middle. So if I drag that up, you can see that more or less the middle, lower middle is what's being affected, whereas the darkest part and the brightest point are not being affected. And you guessed it, same with the colors here. Saturation. Let's go over to this clip right here. This is just a bunch of colors. I've got a saturation slider right there, and I can make this way more colorful and blow out my eyeballs with this very colorful image, or I can decrease that. And if I take it all the way down to 0, it becomes a black and white image. So there's no saturation, there is no color now in this image. And I can double click that to reset. And there's a hue slider here, so I can just change. This is similar to some image editing programs where it just rotates the hues around, which on this particular image looks really cool. It's like I'm at a rave. All right. Sorry if anyone is sensitive to bright flashing colors. All right. So that's our primary colors wheels. That is the most basic tools. And that is something I think are if you know nothing else, you can actually get by with a lot just using those things. For the longest time, color grading tools up until like 10, 15 years ago, for those that were working on digital stuff, like they basically had this. So any movie you liked that was done digitally for in the early 2000s, they basically had that, which is pretty crazy to me. There is a lot more that we can do. So let's go into working with these other things. Any questions on the primary tools or interface or anything like that? Let me know. Put it in the chat. Otherwise, I will keep yapping away. All right, hue. Question on hue. So the easiest way to explain hue, it's sort of like rotating around this color wheel here. So you can see that it's like red, green, red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, purple. So if I have an image that's like entirely, let's do this. pretty much entirely red. And then I adjust the hue, it's going to rotate it around this line one way or another. So if I rotate that, you see it's rotating. It's actually this way, clockwise. And it's just going to keep rotating that hue around. Um, you're probably not going to use that too much for color correction stuff, unless you want to do something kind of trippy. Or, if the whole thing is just a little off based on how things are shot in camera, you can like, let's just nudge it over like that. I have not, Clarence asking about HDR wheels. I have not covered that yet. And Nick, how do we apply the primary color tool to the clips? All right. So let's go over working with nodes, and then we can get into those other steps. So basically, nodes are empty containers. Like every node is blank. It's just this is a drawer that you can put a bunch of tools in. So if I'm working on this image right here and I want to adjust the gain and I drag that gain adjustment is now in this node. And everything that I do to while this node is selected gets stored in that node. So I can actually do other things too. I can change the contrast. I can add some tint. I can do a lift. I can go to a whole other tool and start making adjustments. And all of that is going to be in this one node. You can do as many things as you want in one node, and that will be saved in there. I think it's a little bit easier to work when you have things separated out into a few different nodes. So I'm going to right click on this node and click reset. And you can add a new node by right clicking and clicking add node and add serial, which is just serial being, in sequence. So a next node in this path here. You can also use Alt or Option S as the shortcut to add a node. And so now I have two nodes. So if I select this node, and let's say I've changed the gain of that color, and now I go to this node, and now I'm going to take the lift. I've done two different things, and each of those are in two different nodes. And I can click on the number of this node and turn it off, just disable it. I haven't deleted anything, but I've disabled it. So I can see that's what that node is doing, and I can click on number 2 to turn that node back on to see what that node is doing. And as you go, you may add more and more nodes. I think the best thing to do is to keep it simple, and we'll go into what a one possible node structure is for a project. A couple other tools to play with here before we get into creating an actual project. I'm going to right click on this node, click reset. Something else you may use, there's these custom curves tool here. And this allows me to sort of draw what sort of contrast or luminance adjustments I'm doing. By default, this is brightness, or Y, or all of these channels are together here. So I'm affecting all of the image. So if I drag this point in the upper corner, let me zoom in on that a little bit. In the upper corner here, there's a little dot. I can grab that and pull that up or down. And that's essentially doing the same thing as gain. But I can customize it by clicking a point in the middle or anywhere and dragging that up or down. I can click that, and then I can click a point here and drag that down. And now I start to create some contrast. That's the sort of thing I want to do. Or I can do something really weird. Just keep drawing points, and that looks absolutely ridiculous. You probably don't ever want to do that on an image, but you can. So I've created this crazy shape here. So the other thing you can do with that is separate out different channels. So if I want my red channel to be higher, and I click on green, and I want my green channel to be maybe lower in the shadows, You can start to do some all sorts of crazy things with that as well. This is one way where um you can create looks in this. You can create correctional. So if your image is like it's too blue, I can drag this and drag out the blue, and it becomes warmer, a little more yellow. We'll go over that in context as well a little bit later. Just want to make sure you know it's here. And then if I go over to this clip, we have in my custom curves, we have these other tools. So hue versus hue curves. So I can change one hue into another. So let's say, um, like I want to change these greens to be blue, and I want to isolate that. So before we talked about changing the whole image, so I could grab the whole image and move that towards red. But if you want to isolate parts of an image and say just green, I can click on this green button right here, and that isolates the green. So it creates a couple points along this curve. If I grab that point in the middle, and then I can adjust the green. So you see, as I change that point, you can see I'm taking the green part of the image, so right here, and moving just those colors towards something else. Again, this isn't a real clip, so it's going to look trippier than uh, it might on a real picture, but I think you may get the concept. Um, and every tool has a reset button, so it's usually a circle with an arrow going backwards. And there are other types of hue versus curves in here, so I can change the saturation of a single color. So like just the blues, I can click blue, drag that down, and I'm desaturating the blues or saturating just the blues. So that's going up and down. Same thing for hue versus luminance. So I can change the brightness of just, let's say, um, the greens again. Let's do that. So make that super bright or a lot darker. So these are the types of tools you may consider using when you're doing a correction. If you open up your image and say, hey, that stoplight is way too bright, you can say, hey, take my reds, make them less bright or make them less saturated, things like that. All right. And now a couple more secondary tools. We have power windows. This is going to be much more interesting when we put it on a face, but I just want to show you what it is conceptually here is that I have a bunch of shapes. I can click the circle, and this is a mask. It limits whatever adjustment I make into this shape here. So I can adjust this. I can grab the handles here and feather it out to make it softer. And then anything I do, so let's say I take the offset way down, you can see that I'm making the image darker inside this image. I can turn that off so we can see what adjustment I'm doing. Now, this is very dramatic. You might not necessarily do that kind of a thing in on your project, but we can, especially if we're going subtler. This might be, can feather this a lot and say like that, just that corner right here is too bright. So before, after, you can do that kind of thing within Windows, and we can just brighten someone's face, or we can, if there's a lamp that is too bright or too dark, things like that, we can adjust those. So this is all very sort of theoretical and um, in presentation thus far, just so you know, all of the tools are here. Now we can start talking about this on real projects and then get a few more tools as we go for what for how things will work in reality. Next concept I want to talk about color management. So here's an image. What do you notice about it? Let me know in the chat. How does it look to you? What's Looks flat. Yeah, getting some flat. Dull, gray, yes. So here's a fun thing. Desaturated, yes. Dull, gray, unsaturated, yeah. So, and washed out. Yep, all that's exactly what we're seeing. The reason we're seeing that is because this image is in log. It's a format that cameras record in because they're trying to compress as much data as they can into an image that is recorded. It's sort of like, if you order a mattress online, it's like deflated in this plastic bag. When you put that on your bed, you're not like, hey, look at this great looking mattress I have. You need to open it up and unroll it and let it kind of sit until it gets full again. That's kind of what we need to do to our image when we get it. Um, so we're going to talk about how to do that. Now, if you ever are showing off an image or your mattress, you try not to keep it
At
in that
Davinci,
state.
wellness accessible to everyone, whether in our offices or at
Right?
home.
Oh,
From medical weight
someone's
loss and hormone balancing,
unmuted,
to vitamin optimization,
and I
and
don't think they want to be.
Regenix creates tailored health
Martha,
plans
that's
that
you.
fit your needs. Discover it.
Sorry about that.
All good. And just so anyone knows, you can unmute yourself if you want to say something and ask a question that way. That's totally cool. I just want to make sure it's intentional. Otherwise, feel free to put things in the chat. All right, so color management. So the idea here is we want to get something from what our camera sees, which is something like this, into what our display can show. It's not that this image is lacking color data. All of that color data, it's there. It's just that we haven't told our display how to view this. We haven't told it that it's looking for a certain amount of values. It doesn't know that the mattress is still in its packaging. So the way to do this, well, one of the ways to do this is by using Resolve Color Management. This is within the settings in project settings in your Resolve project. So let's assume for the time being that this is a project that has used one camera and that's the same one used throughout. We'll get into multi-camera uh, workflows in a little bit, but we have this one image, we need to color manage it, and we can do that pretty easily by going to the bottom right here, clicking on that gear icon, or Shift 9 on the keyboard to open up our project settings in Resolve. So if you haven't seen the screen before, this tells you all of the settings that are specific to this project. Now, if I stay here on master settings, we've got our timeline resolution, our frame rate. So, these are the types of things you may want to have set when you started editing. But once we're into the color side of things, we can talk about color management. So color management. So by default, there's this color science thing here that says Davinci YRGB. All that means is that it's showing you the RGB channels that are sort of apparent by default without any transformation. Basically, Davinci YRGB Resolve is saying, I don't want to do anything. Just, what you see is what you get, and that's it. It's not doing anything for you. Now we can change that into, if I click on that, Davinci YRGB color managed. So now I'm telling Resolve, hey, I want you to help me choose an input and an output for what this footage is. There are a couple other options here, which we will not cover in detail today, but I can answer questions as we go with ACES. If you've heard of it, I can answer questions. If you haven't heard of it, just go ahead and ignore it for now. It's not, it's just another method of color managing. But I'm going to click on Davinci YRGB color managed right here. And the first option I have is automatic color management, a color processing mode, and an output. If you are working with raw footage, automatic color management might work because Resolve can read if it like a raw format like Red or Blackmagic Raw or something like that. It can figure out what that is. Sometimes you're not doing that. You'll get ProRes files or something like that, an MP4 from your camera, and you need Resolve to know what you're working with. If you're working with one camera, we can just tell it what to do in a couple of ways. So one way is turning off automatic color management here, changing our color processing mode. Let's go that to custom at the bottom here. And now we can tell this project exactly what we want it to do. So input is going to be the color space that our footage was shot in. Do your best to find out. So your DP should probably know this info. If they don't, ask them what camera it is and then start Googling to see what color space it records in. This particular one, image I know is an ARRI and it's log C3. And then the output is, how what our monitor is set to. The standard for most things is going to be Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. So that is common for most things. If you're working for an HDR output, something that's going to a theater, something else, it may be different, but this is standard for most things. And if we do just that, watch this image for a second. I'm going to click save. Ta-da! Now, how's that look? I'd say that's a lot better. So basically, what Resolve is doing is it's understanding what the input is and it's understanding what the output is. So we are going, if we go back to this color pipeline, this is what's happening. At the project level, we have an input and an output. And that is happening. We don't even have to manage that in nodes. That is just happening at the project level. So we don't have to touch it again. Now let me go back to here. So color management, color science is Davinci RGB color managed. Color processing mode, at least for now, is custom. I set an input color space to what the camera is, and the output in this is Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. Usually the default is Rec 709 Scene, which is for all intents and purposes equivalent to what I just did manually. So you can keep it like that. I'm going to do this again um, with a few different settings, just so we get the process. So right now I've got my log image. That's what I'm seeing. There's no color management at the project level. I can turn on Resolve Color Management, DaVinci YRGB Color Managed. And now I'm going to keep color management on, automatic color management on, and I'm just going to change the color processing mode to HDR. That doesn't actually change uh, the output. So our output is still Rec 709. It just means that as I'm grading, I have a few more, more latitude, more, more room to work with the image. It kind of keeps it in that log state under the hood. So I'm more flexible with the types of adjustments I can make. I'm going to click save. And that has also worked because Resolve is reading what this is, probably because I said it at some point. So this is actually another easy way to work. Keep color management on, and then I can right click on this image, this clip, and say input color space and set it manually here. So let me reset that because that was probably something I did. Again, Shift 9, color management is on, color science, automatic, HDR, output is Rec 709. That's the basics. That's probably the simplest thing, so because that's the fewest settings here. And then we highlight all the clips, so I can hit click here and shift and click all these clips, or just click one clip at a time, right click and choose my input color space here and set that to ARRI log C3. And now I'm telling Resolve just this clip or just a few clips or that color space. And then it does the rest of the color management for me. Now, anything else I do is happening in the middle of my input transform from from Array log C into something else, and then from that intermediate space into Rec 709. So this node, any adjustment I make is happening in the middle of that color management, so I can just focus on warming it up or cooling it down or making it brighter or darker. And I don't have to worry about my output transform at all. It's just going where I want. That's a lot of info. What questions do you have about color management thus far? Sounds like you're ready to get into a real project. Let's do that. Um, all right. Here we go. I'm going to open up a new project, or I guess an existing project. So I have here a timeline for a short film with a bunch of clips. This is, can you make a template to apply so they all match? Uh, Laura, what do you mean by that? You mean all of the clips? I can show you how to do that on this because this is all one big timeline with a lot of clips in it. So I have a short film here, or this was a sort of a proof of concept short film. It's sort of a offbeat thriller comedy. So there's these two guys here and they're tied up and because they pissed off this guy who's trying to help them see the error of their ways. Um, Brief backstory on this short here. But so we have a timeline, and this is all what we're currently seeing is log footage. And let's go through the steps of what we need to do. So we talked about before color management kind of being the bookends to our process. We talked about setting a look, scene looks, and then individual shot adjustments. So let's go through all of that, all of those steps, probably for the rest of the time, and I can pull up other examples as needed. And we can go through more shot by shot style adjustments. But I do want to make sure you get this process. So yes, Laura, the whole movie has the same color. So this whole project was shot with a Panasonic. Um, yeah, so Clarence, you're saying the timeline wide node correction. We will go over that, although I'm not going to do that for the color management because that's happening at the project level. So all of this was shot on a Panasonic, and I'm currently looking at log footage. So what I want to do is I'm going to hit Shift 9, go to my project settings, go to color management, color science, turn on resolve color management, Davinci YRGB color managed, turn that on. All right. And because I know what this is all on the same camera, I can set this all manually. So I'm going to turn off automatic color management, going to go down to custom, choose my input color space, which is Panasonic V-Gamut V-Log, timeline color space. So the timeline color space we haven't talked about just yet, so I will in a second. So, but my output color space is Rec 709. Let's keep it at Rec 709C. That is the default. That is also essentially what my monitor is set to. And so the timeline color space is the color space. We're not going to see that. That doesn't affect the output, but that is the space in which our adjustments happen. So we have things coming from Panasonic V gamut into Vlog into the timeline color space. You could call this a working color space. And everything we do happens there. And then everything is output to our output color space. So I like to work in Davinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, which is just resolves sort of middle place to work. It's a large color space. It's very flexible. It can accept basically every camera into it, and it's big enough that every color is in there, so that you can output to Rec 709, or you can output to HDR, or output to P3 for cinema projection without having to regrade your project. One of the And that is one of the reasons to do color management, because if I just transform this whole thing into Rec 709 from the very beginning and then do all my adjustments, if I need it to go to a different color space, I have to regrade my whole project. I don't want to do that. I'm lazy. So in this case, I can do my whole grade, and then if suddenly someone says, "Hey, we need this output as something else. We need this P3 DCI, which is for cinema projection," then I can just click that one thing and export a new version, and it's ready to go for that. So that is one advantage. At the indie level, most of the time you're probably working with a Rec 709 or a Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 for most things. Uploading to YouTube, putting it on your TV. If you send it to film festivals and they need a DCP, they can do a conversion from this. So if you're confused about all that, I would just say stick to this and you're good for like 98% of the things you'll be doing. So let's do that. I've set my input color space, timeline, output, I hit save, and there we go. My image has transformed. It's looking a bit dark only because that's how it was shot. It was shot, things were a little bit underexposed. Not everything, but a lot of it was. And that's okay because we can deal with that with our color grading. So there we go. We've got our color management set. Step one, we're good to go. And we're still on the edit page. So let's go over to our color page here. Going to click at the bottom. Clarence is asking, did I mean to set it to HDR in the color management? Yes, yeah. So, the thing here is this is the timeline working luminance, HDR 1000. Basically, this is what is the luminance level when it's in the intermediate stage, not my output. So my output is still Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. Output gamut is the output color space. The timeline working luminance basically means how much latitude do I have to work with. And for log footage, there is a wide gamut, a wide dynamic range that is available. So I see there's really no downside to setting this as high as you can possibly go. This could even be HDR 4000. It's not going to change what happens too much, but it allows me to work in the widest space possible, and then that gets mapped to my output. Whereas if the working luminance was SDR, um, then I am limited in the amount of changing the dynamic range in the grade, if that makes sense. So basically, I'm making guacamole and I cut up my avocados here and I put it in this timeline working color space and working luminance. I want that mixing bowl to be really big because I have a lot of room to do what I need to do. And then I put that into my serving bowl, which is here. All right. So I've got save and here we go. Let's talk about project setup because I can just start looking at here and making adjustments and all right, I can adjust this shot and then go to the next shot and I can adjust this shot and then suddenly I'm just doing a lot of stuff. It's not necessarily a method to what I'm doing there. So let's talk about the method of how we might want to work. So let me just park it on a shot right here. Oh, the other thing, a quick tip here is you notice I have a thumbnail for all my clips in here, and some of them are showing up still looking log. That's because they kind of need to refresh when they're loaded. Um, but the image is color managed. So if you ever want to refresh these just to be closer to what you would see in the monitor, you can right click on this and right click on any clip and select update all thumbnails. And it takes a second and bam, look at that. Whole color managed timeline is now viewable in my clips viewer right over here. So let's keep going. So let's talk about setting up our nodes and our node tree. This will give us a sense of how we might want to approach grading our shots. We're going to set this up And then I'm also going to jump into the things that happen at the timeline level. So that's the things. So we're differentiating what happens on one shot and what happens on all the shots. So first, let's talk about setting up what happens on one shot. So we have a node, and we can do all of our adjustments on here, but I like to separate these into different parts of our process or different types of operations. So one, there's any number of ways we can do this. Here's what I recommend if you're new to grading. We'll have one node. I'm going to click node label, right click, node label. I'm going to say EXP. This is exposure. Exposure is the brightness of our shot. If we're working on log footage, and I don't mean that it looks like log, I mean that, this is log footage that is then being color managed. But we're working on log footage. I can use my offset to adjust exposure. That's fairly similar to what an exposure adjustment is like on set. So if you're looking at the shot with your DP as your color grade, and he's like, can we bring that up a stop? And you might not know exactly how much that is, but you can just grab this until they say it's good. Maybe we want it to be there. But our first operation in most of our balancing, correcting stage of things is how bright does it look? Is it correct? Is it too bright? Is it too dark? That is one of the most important things of does a shot look right? Next, oh, we have a question. Can the exposure for one clip be applied to all clips on the timeline? Yes. So we can do that a couple of different ways. I'll get to that as we cover timeline adjustments shortly. But yes, so the short answer is there's a number of ways to apply any adjustment to more than one clip, whether that's the whole timeline or a few clips. So we'll get into that. Um, After exposure, I'm going to right click, set node label, type BAL, that's balance. You can have this on one node, you can't have it on a separate node, but I want to separate these ideas so you get used to understanding what they are, and they may be a separate part of your process. So balance, this is some people think of this as white balance. Um that's not quite how I want to think about it, but balance is, what is the balance of color in a shot? Is it if it's too warm, maybe I want to cool it down, or I can use the color temperature to adjust that, or if it has a green tint, I can take the tint slider and drag it the other way. I'm going to reset all of those things, but the balance node is for the balance of color. Again, you can do these in different nodes if you want to, but this is how I'm going to suggest you start doing it for now. The reason I said this isn't necessarily white balance is because white balance is sort of a on-set thing to make sure that a white or a neutral gray card is gray. For creative purposes, you don't always need to get things to look neutral. For example, if this scene was shot under a cooler light, but the actual creative intent of the scene is that there was like one dim tungsten uh light bulb overhead, you don't want it to look neutral. This is a movie. You don't want movies don't necessarily look neutral. They look how they should look that makes sense for the story. So the balance for this shot might be this, where it's actually warm and not neutral at all. Or, if you think of maybe we want it to look kind of dingy and grimy, just not flattering at all, and then it's green. That is not white balance, but it is the balance we want for this shot. Just as an example. I'm going to right click and reset that. Let's do another node. I'm going to hit Option or Alt S, or you can right click on a node and hit Add Node, Add Serial. The next one in our series, I'm going to call this CON for contrast. Well, if you have a contrast level in a shot that you want to change, I might, let's say, the fill side of his face is too dark, I can decrease the contrast or I can increase the contrast. This isn't, again, something we're just doing on a single shot by shot level. So if you have a shot that needs that, you can have a contrast node. Next node that we'll have in our process here, let's call this, I'm gonna call this hue. I call this hue because it's either contrast or a hue versus hue curve. So let's say in this shot, the reds are way too red. I can go to my, let's say, hue versus saturation over here. I can actually click, I have my qualifier selected here, the eyedropper tool. I can click on this red cap here and we'll create a couple dots on my line here in this custom curve. So think of this that it kind of like wraps around. So there's one dot here, and then one dot over here. So that just wraps around to the other side. So it's this middle one that I actually want to adjust. These two on the sides just kind of stop. Um, these are the bookends for this middle adjustment. So I don't adjust anything else outside of that. So I can bring that down, and you can see that I'm getting less saturation on the reds here, or I can bring that up to max that out. That doesn't look great, but let's say I want to bring that down. So that could be a hue adjustment here, or let's say I wanted the luminance of the blues to be different. So I can eyedropper that. I've got a couple points here. I'm going to bring down the brightness of the hues. Whoop. I can do that. So that's what I tend to do in the hue node. Um, Clarence is wondering, is there a benefit to doing contrast separate from exposure or after balance? So the order of these is more of a thought process of what's most important and less about an ideal image processing order. There are plenty of colorists who will do it the other way around. This is fairly common from what I've seen, and I think makes the most sense. Only because exposure tends to be the biggest change and the most important, then balancing towards what you wanted to do. Contrast, you can actually argue that contrast is also an exposure adjustment, and you could put that all in one same node. I think the benefit is more of a workflow one than an image one, if that makes sense. So contrast, I find, is rarely or is less often something you'll do a big adjustment on. It's more likely like, oh, I've got a big, I really need to brighten up or I really need to darken this shot. A contrast adjustment most of the time that I see on a shot level basis is like, I just need a tiny bit, whoop, or other way, slightly less. So that's why I've got it in that order. You may want to try something different. You may want to, as you get more comfortable with it, try them all on one node if that's easiest for you. But I like to separate it just so you can see what is that doing. Especially it allows you to, just turn off the balance or reset just one of those things without accidentally resetting a whole bunch of other stuff. All right. Next. Um, let's create a key node. So this you can call qualifier, you can call this key, you can call this uh selection, whatever you want. I like this node to be anything that where we're selecting a few hues or a range of colors. So this is similar to hue in that instead of using the tool that selects this is a place where we select things manually. So let's say I wanted a different method of selecting all the reds or blues in a shot. I can go to my qualifier tool, which we have not yet explored. And I've got my eyedropper tool. Let me just drag a line through my reds. And already what that has done in my qualifier tool, it has selected a range of hues, saturation levels, and luminance levels that it thinks I want. Now, if I click here, this is in the upper left of my viewer here. It's highlight mode. When I click that, it shows me what I've selected. So you can see I've selected, and this is what it thinks I want. So these are things that are generally in the red range. Now this is a, a wide range of things, only because skin tone tends to have some red, be a red hue. The hat is a red hue. I don't want that much. So I might play with some of these. I can try turning off that saturation thing. I can try changing the luminance level of this here and seeing if I can just get the hat. So I might turn on saturation, bring up the low edge of that, and now I can get the skin tones out of there. Just adjusting the hat. This is fairly rough and it's hard because the hues here are similar, but you can see I'm mostly getting that. And I can actually clean that up a bit with these tools over here. I can clean black, clean white, which is the this is creating a matte. So it's a black and white image saying include the things that are white, don't include the things that are black. Um, so that helps you understand like what the clean white and clean black is doing. But I can use this tool to really isolate just a few parts of my image if I really want to do a very isolated adjustment. So if I want to just grab the hat, maybe his color, and do an adjustment for there, I'm going to turn off highlight mode for a second. So I did that with by hitting Shift H or clicking this button. This is the third button in my upper left of my viewer. And you can also see, maybe sort of, in this node right here, it shows me just what's being affected. Now I can go to any other tool like my gain or my gamma or my curves. If I go to my custom curves here and I just start dragging that up, you can see I'm only adjusting what's in the selection range that I have done in this node. So I can darken that if I want, and that's only happening in here. All right, now let's talk about one more node I'm going to add here, and I'm going to call this shape. So I've added this shape node, and this is where I tend to use windows. Power windows, this is something that I showed you before, so that's this circle with the points on it. And here I can create a shape. I can create a square, a circle, custom shapes. So if I want to mostly focus on this guy right here, I can drag this shape. I can feather it out to make it soft. And then I can take my offset, let's say, and increase that. And so if I turn off that adjustment, I can see before and after, before and after. I'm not saying that looks the best, but you can see that I can easily isolate one subject and change where my eye goes by doing that. If I bring that back, maybe I actually want to brighten up this guy because he's a little bit too dark. I can do that just by dragging this window around and before and after, before and after. And I'm toggling that just by hitting Command D while I have one node selected, and that just turns off and on one node. It's another good reason why sometimes these are separate. So if I click on my key node, Command D, that would be Control D on Windows. So you can just see before and after, and that's a common thing to do. I'm looking at a node, turn it off and on, and just say, does that look better than what I had before? And you go back and forth, and you can sometimes it's, like at the optometrist, we're like A or B, A or B, A or B. I don't know. A looks pretty good. B looks pretty good. That is part of the color grading process, and you're going to doubt yourself, and that's okay. Um, that's it's something to get used to. It's something to play with. Like it's both fun and maddening. I'm just gonna be honest. Like it's part of the thing. So sometimes, and you can highlight multiple nodes here and turn them all off. Say, okay, does that actually look better? Or does that look better? And sometimes you're like, you know what? It looked better before. I'm gonna reset all of this and it's fine. It's fine. Um, yeah, so that can be part of the process. You don't need to do a whole lot to every shot. If your DP was good, you might not need to do anything at all. I've worked on a couple projects where, I'm going through a grade and the DP's looking at it and we stop on a shot. He's like, "Oh, that one is perfect." I'm like, "Great. I did nothing to that shot. They did a great job." Like it was just that way from the beginning. And other shots, things happen where sometimes it's too bright or camera settings, and some things do need to be balanced or corrected. But you don't need to do that on every single shot, depending on the project. Sometimes yeah, a lot of this depends on the project. So just know that sometimes you need to do a lot, sometimes you don't need to do anything, and that is okay. All right, so that is a node tree that is gonna cover a lot of your bases for generally what needs to be done in a project. There are more things you can do, but I think that is a good starting place. Now, do we need to create this manually in each shot? You see, if I switch to the next shot, all of those nodes are gone, and I don't want to create those from scratch every time. You don't need to. I'm going to, uh, like I can click on any other shot. I can hit Command A or Control A on Windows to highlight every single shot. And then I can right click on this and I can click Apply Grade. So I'm going to I have another node, another shot selected. Command A to select everything. And I haven't done anything else to any other shot. Um, and then I can right click on this one that I created my node tree for, right click, apply grade. And I haven't done anything, but it's asking me, do I want to replace existing grades? Because this is overwriting everything on every shot. And I click replace. And the thing that I did to this one shot has now been rippled to every single other shot. So I now have this fixed node tree. So anytime I switch a shot, I have a place to do all of these adjustments that we talked about. This is a great way to save a lot of time and just a setup for the project. Like, okay, now I'm ready to grade. And you'll notice that there is this exposure adjustments that I did on this one shot that has been applied to everything. Uh, you're not necessarily like for some projects, you want to make sure that this is blank. But for this particular project, because things came out pretty dark, I do want to keep that exposure adjustment that has been applied to everything. And as I go on each shot, I can see, does it need that? But that's probably this is a better starting level than this. So that is why that is there. Just so we can see. But yeah, as we go through the whole project, like that level is a better starting place. And that's just based on how this particular project was shot. I'm pretty sure that it was actually not monitored with a LUT on set. They were looking at the log image. I don't recommend shooting that way because that's not how it's going to come into your computer once you've color managed it. You tend to want to view things on set with a LUT based on how you think it's going to be color managed. That's kind of a whole other topic, but I don't think anyone should view log at any point except for like just before you bring in a project or that kind of a thing. Log is a recording format. It is not a viewing format. And that's my soapbox for the day. All right. Next step. We could start going through all these shots, but we did have a question before about timeline level stuff. And we're going to go there next. So you can maybe kind of see this. Nick is wondering, confused about the shape function. So it's not, so this fixed node tree I have here, these are the things that I might do on every shot. It's kind of like, I'm cooking something and I bring out a bunch of knives and a bunch of bowls. Those are the things that I think that I may use as I'm cooking. But I don't need to do it on every shot. Like if this shot, let me go to this shot right here. Like if that looks good to me, I don't need to use any of these. And then I just go to the next shot. And like that's fine, that's fine, that's fine. And then I get to a shot where I'm like, oh, you know what? Here I want to use a shape. So that shape node, even the key node, even the hue node, those are just placeholders. Like these are the things that I might do on a shot, and I'm probably gonna do on several shots. That way I don't have to create a new node for every single shot. This also allows me to go through the whole timeline quicker. So for example, I can do an exposure pass really quickly when I'm set up this way. So I can hit the down arrow on my keyboard to switch to the next shot, and I can go, I'm gonna change the exposure a little bit here, down arrow, next shot, change the exposure a little bit here, down arrow, next shot, change a little bit, down. And this is how like I can do a pass of the whole movie just sort of instinctually, or just is that bright enough? Like, does that match how bright the last shot was? Make that a little bit more. That's too bright. Go down. And then I'm doing an exposure pass for the whole thing. And I don't necessarily make an adjustment for every single one. I just keep going. How's that shot look? That one, that one. And then I've done that, I can go back to the beginning. I can click on my balance node and then next shot, next shot. Like, all right, let's warm that up. Next shot. And that will stay on the same node. If that doesn't happen, there is a setting up here in the three dot menu of my node area in the upper right, where there's this switching clip selects, and I select same node. So assuming I have the same nodes on every, or at least the same number of nodes or a similar number of nodes on every shot, then that allows me to keep the same node selected as I switch shots. So that lets me I can do a balance pass. I'm just going through the whole thing, and I might not do that much, but there's a couple shots where I might do a little something. And then same thing for contrast, or I can just go through and do contrast and hue, and then switch back and forth. And then later on, I go back to the beginning. Let me do a key pass or shape pass, just to do some windows. So, short answer, it's not applied to every shot. It's applied to any shot that needs it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, some things we can do, and how we might want to use that in a little bit. Next main thing I want to talk about, though, is our timeline level grades. So this is all shot level. Like we have the same node tree copied to every shot, but these are, each shot has their own unique adjustments. So just because I do this crazy offset adjustment on this shot, I have the same node here because I copied that node tree over, but that adjustment is not affecting this clip. So I can do my own crazy adjustment here. So I have a very red clip and a very blue clip. Let me reset that because it hurts my eyes. I have two dots here at the very top, and I also have this drop-down menu. So if I click either the second dot, that also changes this drop-down, clip and timeline, clip and timeline. So clip is the first dot, second dot, also second drop-down, timeline. So the timeline, this is, as it sounds like, the timeline nodes here affect absolutely everything on the timeline. So if I have this node, you see that I have different nodes now. If I clip over here, that's clip. That just affects this one clip. Timeline affects the whole timeline. So if I change everything to very green and I go to a previous clip, you can see all of these clips are now green because this timeline node is affecting everything. So if I wanted my whole project to be green, this would be great, but that's not what I want. So I'm going to click on it, reset, and there we go. That's better. So the purpose of this timeline node, so these timeline nodes is for my project or timeline level adjustments. These may be subtler types of things. So I can use this, like someone asked before about the exposure level. If I do want, everything to be brighter, if everything was too dark, I could just apply an exposure adjustment here to make everything brighter or darker. That is something you can do. What I tend to use this section for is my overall look. So the look being, sort of in a simplistic way, it's like, what Instagram filter are we using for this film? Or in the film days, it would be, what film stock are we printing this out to? Um, the, when things were printed on, like they were shot on a film stock, and then the main thing that affected the look was the print stock of film. In the digital world, we can do just about anything to apply a look to a film. So if you think of films like, I don't know, if you think of something like Seven, Fincher, or like Sleepy Hollow from Tim Burton, these are very like high contrast, uh, low saturation kind of things. If you think of a lot of like Michael Bay movies, they kind of have this teal and orange sort of color scheme to them. Things that apply to a whole project, that's where we want to do those things here. We have any number of tools that we can use to create that. So let's say for this project, it is a comedy, but it's kind of have as a thriller vibe to it. So if I did want to make things feel a certain sort of grungy way, I could create some green in the shadows and then some orange in the highlights and increase the contrast. And I can have that be my look. And that is now applied to everything in my timeline if that's the look I want. I don't think that looks too bad. May not be what I want here, but you can do that. And the other thing is this look, because it's on the timeline level, it's going to apply to every shot. So you want to make sure it works for every shot, which means that if I get to a shot and I don't know if that works, this shot is too dark, I can go back to my clip level and I can adjust the exposure to make sure it's where I want and see, okay, now back on the timeline level. Does that contrast work for this shot? Okay, I think so. You tend to want to be a little subtler on the timeline level only because it does have to apply to every shot. So here's a couple things we might want to do as far as creating our look. We talked about shot level stuff. Let's talk about timeline level things. So we're going to want, let's say, I'm going to contrast. So we can just create a level of contrast over here at the timeline level. Contrast tends to be one of the last things here, but we can use that with our contrast slider here. So I can set that here. I can adjust the pivot to see what level I want of contrast for my whole project. We could also reset this node and actually just draw a contrast curve with my custom curves here. So I can bring that down. I can do that. I can create a point here, bring that down. Maybe I do that. Sort of, I want this to be pretty moody. Make that darker. Up to you. But you can play a lot here and then just kind of keep going through your shots and like off and on. We play the optometrist game. Like, does that look better? Does that look better? Next shot. And then, you're going through a lot of shots and seeing how does that look? But again, this is the kind of thing you want to set up for the whole project, so it might be subtler. Speaking of subtler, here's a tool that you can use to actually change the opacity of each node. So you don't need, like, if this is too strong, I don't want to mess with these controls because I like what it's doing. I just want to take it back to 50% of what it's doing. There's this node right here. Oh, wait. Oh, this one, this tool, that one. This is my key control. So this is basically the transparency of everything that this node is doing. So I can take my key output and I can just change key output gain, this thing right here, and I can just drag that down. I drag it all the way down, this node is doing nothing. Drag it all the way up, it's back to 100% or 200%. I can click on it and type 0.5. Bam, that is half of the strength of what I just did. Say, maybe I like that. There we go. Now, depending on what version of Resolve you have there are some new tools in version 19, which is technically still in beta, but I hope it's coming out of beta soon because there are some really cool tools in here that you can use for setting your look for your whole project. I would like to share those with you now. I'm going to hit Command D to turn off this contrast node. We're going to work on this node right here. I'm going to go to the effects panel and I'm going to type in, uh, just let me show you how I'm getting to this actually. So I click effects. There's a search button here, so you can toggle that. And I'm going to type film look. There's this new tool in version 19 called Film Look Creator. If I drag that on there, it's already done something. Um, you may or may not like it, but there's a bunch of tools here that allow you to change, to add a particular film look or let's say a color palette is kind of what this is. Oops, let's get back to that. There are settings like exposure, contrast, some of the things we've seen before, but with slightly different controls. Things like split tone, which is adding one color to the highlights, a different color to the shadows, which tends to be something that a lot of movies do and is a nice looking thing that comes from the film days. Vignettes of adding, well, let me show you. Basically taking the edges, darkening the edges of the frame so you can see. Let me wait for that tool to go away. There we go. So darken the edges of the frame, which you may or may not want. Halation, which is, um, we won't be able to see it on this frame, but this is an effect from film which applies sort of a glow to certain highlights. There's film grain, there's flicker, there's all these other things right here. But we can choose a lot of these to set the look of our project. So presets here, I want to go to clean slate because what that does is it turns everything off. And we start from scratch, and now I can start applying the look to my project. And I can let's start on, we can start here and just see what that does. So I'm going to start with this. Let's start with this film look blend. And right now it's at 0, but I can start to bring it up. If I just drag that all the way and turn off and on, you can see it's changing the color palette of what I've got here. It's desaturating reds, changing blues. If I go to this shot, turn it off and on, you can see it's highlighting certain colors. It's moving the overall look. And there are a couple of different of these palettes I can choose from. Core look, right now it says cinematic. This is a default, but I can choose Rochester. Off and on. I can change it to this. And I can just choose from a number of these. And this is sort of like choosing an Instagram filter. There's a little bit more going on, or at least a more detailed level. But these are some different looks that you can start with. Let's say I like kind of like that for this. This is you know, want a little grungier of a feel, kind of like that palette, sort of muted before, after. Maybe a little strong. Let me bring it back a little bit. And then I can start working into, things like contrast. Let me adjust the contrast. And as I'm looking at the shot, you can bounce over and say, you know what, the exposure needs to be a little bit higher, just so I can see whether this shot is working or not. And I go back to my timeline level, keep working at the look. And no one has yelled at me yet, but I want to get in the habit of labeling nodes. So right click on this, and I'm just going to call this look. And we can go over and say, overall, bring the highlights down if we want. The fade is the black level. So I can bring that up just a bit if I want. And remember, this is on the timeline, so it's applying to the whole project. So before and after. I could change the white balance for the whole timeline if I want. If I want the whole thing to be warmer, I could. Or I can change the tint for everything. And this is, again, like the controls we have over here, but it's all in one spot here, so I can apply this all with one set of tools. You don't need to use them all here. You can use them here. It's a matter of preference, but I do like when things are in one tool. And let's say I wanted to add a little bit of split tone. So let me enable that. I can try dragging that and seeing what that does. So this is applying warmth to the highlights and coolness to the shadows. Let's look at a couple other things, and I can enable and disable that and say, that's a bit strong. I could back that off. I can change where that pivot point is. So where do the shadows start? Where do the highlights end? So where's the warmth applied? Where's the coolness applied? And you know what? That's not too bad. It's giving it a look. Now, this is entirely to taste. Uh, this is a matter of preference. This is either a choice that you or the DP or the director or whoever it is, the creative heads of the project that are in the room, that are able to decide these things. Like you want to decide those with the right people. If you're working as a colorist, you may give some options of what needs to be done, but usually this is something that a DP and a director will decide together, like what is the look and the feel overall, and that is applied here at the timeline level. Now, we have not done a lot on each individual shot. This is what's happening to the timeline, and the reason is this is one of the more important things, like getting things color managed and then applying your look. That's kind of getting you like 75% of the way to getting your project looking the way you want it to look without having to go through on a shot by shot basis. The other thing I want to add here, just while we're on this film look creator, is we do have a grain section. So if I want, let me close my clips viewer and enable the grain. And this might be tough to see, but if I zoom in a lot and I turn up the grain and I click play, you can see that there's this grainy thing happening going on that is film grain that is being applied in the same tool. Let me zoom out. But so you can apply that sort of a texture if you want that film grain happening in your project. You can also, if you aren't using the film look creator, there are other effects. So if I add a new node in my effects, I can type grain, and there's this film grain effect, and I can put that on and choose from very similar settings here and apply that to my timeline. So if you like that, if you want it, I tend to like it for some projects. I'm boosting it up a lot just so you can see it over Zoom because it is fairly subtle, but I want to make sure that you can see that. So there we go. That is great. All right, so that is again a lot. Any questions about the node tree we've set up, about timeline level stuff, or any of those things thus far? Overall process things, or just any question? Let me know. Put it in the chat. We've still got a bunch of shot level stuff we can talk about. But if you have any burning questions, put it in now just to make sure that we get to it. All right. No questions. Also, in addition to questions, let me know if there's any things that are good takeaways you're taking away. I want to make sure you are getting something out of this. If there's something else you want, please let me know as well. All right. All right. Nothing affects the nodes if you move them up and down, does it? No. So this node editor, the spatial adjustments here, like if I do this and that has nothing to do with affecting the image. This is purely an organizational thing. So I can do this if I want, if that's clearer to me. I can, let's say I want my kind of primary adjustments up here and I want These are what we can categorize as secondary adjustments. I can put those over here and drag them all around. So that is purely an organizational thing based on your preference. Where does resolve store projects so you can have a data bank where you can save various looks on a project? Yeah, so a couple different options here. Let me open up the gallery. So if I want to save this, what I've done here just in this one shot, I can right click, grab a still, and it shows up over here in my gallery. This saves not only a still of this image, but this saves all of these particular nodes. So I can right click on the still and display node graph. And all of these nodes are there. They're a little bit, jumbled, but they're all there. And so I can have that to use later. So if I want this exact adjustment, and I want to apply that to this shot here, I can right click, apply grade, and then those exact nodes in that exact arrangement are applied to this shot. So again, that was right click and apply grade. Now in my gallery, I have a sidebar here. So these are stills. There's also a power grade gallery. This is the exact same thing as stills, except that it will show up in all of the projects in this project library. So if I want to save a still, or if I want to save a look that I created and use it on another project, I can save that to a power grade here. So same thing, grab a still, and because I have the power grade gallery selected, it saves it in there. I can also move this into a stills gallery and vice versa. So you can create multiple looks, save it as a still. You can create options, save it as a power grade to use for something else, anything like that. All right, Clarence, how do the HDR wheels differ from the primaries? Yeah, let's talk about these tools. So let me close my gallery there. Let's get to uh, another shot. Let's use this one. I'm going to reset this adjustment on exposure, and let's go over to my HDR wheels. So for those of you who have been following along, most of the time I've been working with my primary palette here, which has lift, gamma, gain, offset. I have this tool that's right next to it. That's called my HDR wheels. Now, this is the name of this one is a little misleading because HDR we tend to think of as high dynamic range as far as an output. That might be how this was designed as like being able to grade HDR material, but it's not specifically limited to that. High dynamic range in this case is really more about having multiple ranges of luminance that you can work on. I might call it dynamic zones tool instead of an HDR wheels tool. But, I'm not in charge of naming things. I'm not a software developer for Blackmagic, so there we go. So the high dynamic range color wheels, we see something that looks very similar. We have a bunch of color wheels here, but there are different tools. And if we look here, there's actually some wheels that we're not seeing. So if I click over here, there's black, dark, shadow, and there's a global wheel. If I click over here, we've got light, highlight, specular, and the global wheel is staying right there. Because this is similar to offset in that it applies to absolutely everything. So I can over here adjust the color temperature, or I can adjust the tint. I can adjust exposure for everything. Now this tool, it isn't exactly the same as offset, but it's very close. But the nice thing here is that this is exposure in stops. So if you're talking to a DP and they say, I need this half a stop darker, you can do minus 0.5. And there we go. So for those who are, capable camera people or talking to those who think that way, you can use this tool precisely in that way, which is great. Or, like let's open it up by a stop. You type 1, that is 1 stop brighter. So that is a doubling of light, which is very nice, I think. I like this tool a lot for that particular reason. The other thing that this tool does is that we have these different zones. So black, dark, shadow, light, highlight, specular. So there are 6 zones, and I can look at a tool and adjust things in those zones. So we effectively had three zones in the primaries, lift, gamma, and gain. HDR wheels, we have six. And you can also control how large those zones are. So I have this zones graph. So right here, the circle and dot, that's these. And then I click on the squiggly line, and that opens my zones. So I see the zones I have here, and I can adjust where those start and end. So speculars is meant to be just the brightest brights, and that's currently starting here. And you can see it fades off there, so it's going up. My black line is this is, over here, and then fades that way means it's from that point going down. And I can change that zone by adjusting it. I want it to be from there and down. Or my shadows, that starts here, it's about halfway, and then fades that way. So that is everything from this point and darker. I can also see that if I click on this wheel next to the name. So if I hold that down, that highlights everything, or it keeps everything in color of what that's affecting and changes everything gray that's not that. If I click on dark, I can see everything that is not the white or gray is what I would be affecting by the dark thing. So if I just want to affect the very darkest parts of the image, or everything that's, in the dark section, I can click exposure. Let's say I want that to be a stop brighter, click exposure 1, or I just drag that slider. And now I've brightened all of those things. Or I can reset that and I can darken the darkest parts. So that's before and after. That is pretty dark. Um, and then highlight, if I click on that highlight thing, you can see there's nothing that's that bright currently. What about light? So those are just the few brightest parts that are available. Maybe I want to make those brighter. And now I've effectively added some contrast to my shot by just brightening the light parts. So we can think of, the color wheels, our primary color wheels, as a few broad adjustments. Global wheel on the HDR color wheels are, a nice offset equivalent, or a good, you could just work with that as far as your primary for doing like global adjustments for exposure and tinting things in a particular way for balance. And then these zones are a little bit more of a scalpel, a little more of a fine tool for making narrower adjustments. So I was able to just bring up the brighter parts here. So now I created this very contrasty look by bringing up the brighter, lighter parts of this image and not affecting anything else. Or, I can apply a color cast to that. So I want to warm up the highlights or bring a lot of blue into those highlights, things like that. And I'll reset that. So that's the HDR wheels. It's another palette here that you have the option to work with. Um, we've only got, oh man, time flies. We only have 9 minutes left. So let's, if you have other questions about this, let me know. I want to do a couple more fun pieces here that we can do with some of our shot level adjustments. And I think I want to talk a little bit about working with raw media, but if you have anything else you want to make sure I answer, put that in the chat now. All right, let's talk about using a window. Let's go back to my shape node here, and I'm looking at this shot and I'm thinking, oh, his face is pretty dark once he starts looking over here. So I can go to my power window tool. I can make a circle and drag that over here, size it down, feather it out. And if at any time I want to see exactly what this node is doing, I can hit Shift H just to see the highlight mode on this node, and I can see that's what I'm affecting. Everything that's gray is not being affected. And I hit Shift H again to turn that off. Or you can use this button right here in the viewer. And So I want that. His face is pretty dark. I'm going to go, let's use, because we talked about it, global on my HDR palette. I'm going to increase the exposure there just a bit. And I'm going to turn off my control here just so I can see what's happening. So that is before and after, before and after. So I can see his face a little bit better now. And if we scroll through the shot, we can see it starts to zoom in a bit. So this adjustment is currently happening here now. Right there. That's not what I want. I want it to follow his face. Now, I can keyframe this manually. Bring back my control here. So I want it right there in the middle of his face. Now I have a tracker here in Resolve. So I can, if a power window is active and applied, and it's where I want it, and I click on this tracker, I can, on here, click on this play button and click track forward, and it's going to try to track his face moving forward from the spot that I'm at and move that power window along and stick it to his face. Let's see what happens. There we go. That was pretty fast and pretty good. So you can see that's sticking to his face. It starts over here and it moves along with him. And I didn't need to do that much. So if you have a character who's moving around and you want to affect what's going on here, like I want this adjustment brightening his face, and it's subtle, but it follows along, this is a great way to go. So this tracker is pretty great. It works really well most of the time. There are a few options that you have here of pan, tilt, zoom, rotate, perspective, just kind of how it's tracking. If for this shot, because he's really not turning his head or anything like that in a way that I want to track, I would actually probably turn off rotate and perspective. I just want it to be in the circle along here. But that is super useful for this kind of adjustment where, his face is too dark otherwise, assuming I like the exposure in the rest of the shot. So that's a super handy tool. And that's just, applying a window, going over to my tracker, clicking that, and there we go. All right, other thing I want to cover pretty quickly, working with raw media. So we talk about color management with defining, what is happening in a like input color space and all that. This project right here, again, we're looking at raw footage, at log footage. But this is raw media from a red Komodo, I believe. So if I look at this and I color manage, let's go to color management, and I just turn on color management. Automatic color management is there. Let's set that to HDR processing mode, but it's otherwise automatic color management. Output is Rec 709. Click save. Ta-da! It's color managed everything. I haven't had to define anything. I haven't selected a color space here because this is raw media. That info is baked into the media. Resolve knows exactly what to do. If I want to affect what that's doing and how it works, I actually do have some raw controls. So in my project settings, that's Shift 9 or this gear icon at the bottom here, I can click Camera Raw. And this is a little bit of a confusing interface because you're not choosing one for this project. This drop down is actually just opening up the settings I want. So this is red. So I just select red and now I'm opening up the red controls. So I can set my decode quality and it's half resolution good. I want to decode this. Let's say I'm working on a pretty low spec computer. I can set this to like 1/8 resolution, hit save, and it's actually going to play back better. But once I am going to do my final render, I want to make sure this is decoded to like full resolution premium. I want this to be looking at my full quality media. So full resolution. And then you can also set what exactly these decode settings are. So if you do know what you're doing or your DP knows what settings they want that's applied here. I can set decode. Um, Usually camera metadata is a safe thing for red. Sometimes you can set a lot of these things manually and it will change what's going on. If you're working with like Blackmagic Raw, there are different controls, but similar things. So decode quality, full resolution, decode using defaults or the camera metadata, or some project things you set up here. So if you are working with raw media, know that that's there, and you have some options of how that shows up. And because this is all raw media, this is all color managed, there's actually this one shot right here, which is not raw. This is a ProRes shot. So I have color management on, so all of these are fine, but this one is as of yet undefined. So I just right click on this, input color space, and I just tell it, hey, this is coming from a red, and this was red wide gamut log 3G10, which tends to be the default for red cameras today. Click on that. And now it is color managed in the way I want. Pretty cool. Oh man. Flame ties when you're having fun. That is about the time we have. So last minute questions, put them in the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself if you're brave and want to speak up for questions. I'll give us a couple extra minutes if there are questions. You want to answer. I want to make sure I get through a few of these. We have some coming in. If you filmed on iPhone, what settings would you recommend? So this depends on, Chris, that depends on how you filmed with the iPhone. If you're using the default camera app, there are some settings in your settings, general camera, something like that, where you can choose whether you're filming in standard, like SDR. You can choose if you're filming in HDR. If you're filming in standard, then it's going to be Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 as your input for most things. And if you are using HDR mode, that's going to be Rec 2020, I believe, for your color space, probably HLG, I think, for your Gamma. If you use something like the Blackmagic app for iPhone, which is free, that allows you to have a few more settings of using something like Apple Log if you have if you have an iPhone, I think 14 or 15 or later. Um, so you can use that. You can choose whether you're shooting in Rec 709, Rec 2020, P3, things like that. So it really depends on how you shot it. The app was the Blackmagic camera app for iPhone, and there is now a version for Android. So that it's a great app for filming stuff on your iPhone because you have pretty detailed camera controls to shoot on your phone. I shoot on my phone all the time just for like tests and previs and things like that. So that it's pretty great. And then you can control the quality. So if you do have a more recent iPhone, you can shoot in log. You can add LUTs to your camera there to view it. You can change exposure and things like that in a really great way. So short answer for the phone, importing that and color managing it really depends on how you shot it. Hard to give you a definite answer. Quick review of groups and how LUTs would help us. Okay. Cool. Let me do LUTs first. So let me go to my color management and turn off all color management. So I'm looking at log right here. Here's something that you can do, and there's nothing wrong with doing it. I'm going to go to timeline. I'm going to add a new node. I'm going to right click on my node, and I've got LUT. And there are a bunch of built-in LUTs. In Resolve, you can also add LUTs to, let me go to color management. There's an open LUT folder. This opens up, you drag a LUT in there. If you get one from your DP, click update lists just to refresh Resolve. Also, 3D lookup table interpolation. This should always be set to tetrahedral. It is not a default. Don't know why, but it's better quality. That is a side note, but that is helpful. Save. All right, so this is a non-color managed project currently. I'm going to color manage just by clicking LUT. Let me go to red. And I've got this red LUT, and this is the LUT that was used on set. And click that. And you know what? That LUT has been applied. And because I'm at the timeline level, I have a project that looks pretty good. Um, and you can do that. That's totally fine. Like there's nothing wrong with going that way. This limits you to that one exporting to this one color space that the LUT does, and that has you work, everything that's on the clip level is in the red log format. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So if that's how you want to color manage, then great. If you have a LUT that looks good and works for it, that's possible. You can also do that for editing. If you're still editing this project, you can add a LUT to the timeline just based on how it was shot on set and just leave it at that. So color management, you could use the resolve color management, or you can use a LUT that is transforming from camera space into your display space. And that is totally cool too. I tend to think of that as a more limited workflow, but that's not a bad thing. That's just uh it's just another way of working. Um, I don't advise most colorists to work that way, only because you sometimes do want that flexibility to be able to output to different color spaces, to work in a particular intermediate space that is more familiar and consistent that all your tools can work in. But there's absolutely nothing wrong in working that way. So it's like if you shot using that on set and you apply that at the end and everyone likes how it looks, go for it. Can this replace Photoshop for stills? Susan, short answer is yes. Longer answer is it's not really meant for that, but I do a lot of image editing in here just because I'm familiar with it. Uh, the thing is, you will need to, it's meant for a video resolution. So if you want to, like, if you have a still and it's a huge resolution, you'll need to create a whole new project, change your timeline resolution to the resolution of that still, and then you'll work with it in here with nodes, and then you can go to uh where is it? Export current frame as still in order to save that image. So it's not really meant for an image workflow, but you absolutely can do that. If you are trying to get away from Adobe and need a specific image editor, I use Affinity Photo, which I really like. So you could do that too, but yeah, I do a fair amount of what you could call photoshopping directly in here, and that's totally cool. Just remember that it's more of a workaround than it is like meant for working on stills. Quick review of groups. All right, let me do this super fast. Um, Let me go back to Signman, this project over here. So if you want groups are a way of working on a number of clips at once. So let's go. I do have a group set up, but let's say I want, to work on a couple shots at the same time. So I've got these 3 shots. I can highlight them, right click, and I can go to groups, or I can add into a new group, and it creates a group. So it links all of these, and I've done that already. So you can see there's this little link icon when one of these 3 clips is selected. That means all of the